Hello and welcome to State of the Project Meros, and this is the November edition 2020. I am your host, Cryptosi, and as usual, I am joined by the often described as enigmatic Kayaba. Kayaba, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for asking.
Okay, so this is our second video episode. We done our first video last month. This is our second one. We've got a little backdrop now. We're kind of coming up in the world. Hopefully, we'll get some little animations and stuff like that going. Kaiba's thinking that's a terrible idea. But for those of you who have not listened to the podcast before, or indeed watched the podcast, this is all about Meros. Meros is a project which is a cryptocurrency. It's a mixture of proof of work and proof of stake using a unique system called merit caching. Am I selling it right, Kayaba?
Uh, yeah. I mean, first of all, I just want to say I'm excited for how our video stream evolves. Second of all, I might go into further description of what mirror caching is, but yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. We have a Discord server where we get people to ask questions. We had quite a few questions asked this week, which is really this month, which is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to asking those. And if you do want to join, link will be in the description below. But without any further ado, Kayaba, I'm going to get started. If you're ready.
Yeah, sounds great to me.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question I had is regarding a. I went straight into the GitHub. So the first question is regarding an Arch compilation guide.
hmm
Is it finished? Because it seems really short. And is that because Meros is that easy to build from source?
So, Meros used to be pretty complicated to build. Like, you had to set up a lot of dependencies, and it was decently annoying. But a while ago, we've actually talked about him on the podcast. It was a developer I was really fond of. Unfortunately, he lost the time to contribute, which was disappointing to me, and I'm sure it was disappointing to you as well. His name was Javier Romero,
Yeah.
and he really helped get us on a more, I'll go with professional track. He helped a lot with our automated testing. He helped us get Docker images to increase accessibility. He moved us over to a new testing framework. And one of the things he did is he had the dependencies automatically build themselves. So now, yes, compiling Meros is much easier. It's really just install the compiler, the build tools for your system, and then just download Meros and actually run the compilation command. So yeah, it's definitely gotten a lot more accessible. And this isn't just for Arch Linux that it's such accessible. It's the same for all platforms we're looking at.
Awesome. So it'll be just as easy for Windows, just as easy for Mac users as well.
It's already that easy for Mac users, and that's the plan for Windows as well.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so I'll put a link to as all of the questions. I'm going to put a link to them in the description. So there's a link to that actual GitHub situation, I guess, in the description, so you can go there and check it out for yourself. The next one I wanted to speak to you was about issue number 249. Now, this kind of went over my head. It's titled "When Two Chains Have Equal Work, Meros Reorganizes the smaller tail hash." I didn't really understand this, Kyle. Could you explain what this was, as it did seem
Sure.
like a important problem?
Sure. So with Meros, we have a proof of work blockchain that we use to secure the network. It's part of mirror caching and so on. It doesn't actually handle transaction verification, which is how we have instant transactions because we don't actually confirm them on the blockchain. So that said, this proof of work blockchain, it follows Nakamoto consensus, which means that the chain with the most work behind it, the most hash power, the longest chain in simple terms, is the one that's used. That said, you're able to create two quote unquote longest chains. So it's not actually about the length of the chain, because you can have a chain with length like with a length of 10, yet it can technically have less work than a chain that's only 9 blocks long. It's a whole thing. But the point is that you can basically get two chains to be considered equivalent with the amount of hash power behind them. And when that happens, you have to enforce a tiebreaker. So that tiebreaker is whatever chain has the lower hash. So if one has a hash of let's say 10. Of course, when we're talking about hashes, they're 32-byte numbers, they're very long, it's very hard to express them. But let's say one has a hash of 10 and one has a hash of 12. 10 is lower than 12, so that's what we use the tiebreak to. That said, when we look at the tiebreaker, we look at the tail of the blockchain. We look at the very last block added, when instead of that, we should look at what's the fork block is, the very first block that was different. When you look at the very last block, if they have the same work and they keep advancing one block at a time and they keep matching each other's work, then you can actually flicker between those chains for a decent while, because every other block is statistically likely to have a lower than the other. So those two chains will kind of bounce back and forth until one eventually gets more hash power for whatever reason. And that's really just the network synchronizing with each other, or will happen. I'm not discussing some fatal doomsday scenario, but it's a lot more efficient to go off the fork block. So then if you go off the fork block, which is the very first block that the two were different for, then as soon as a fork is detected, no matter what new blocks, you can definitively resolve to one or the other. So the network can just instantly reconcile, and there's no worries about switching back later if the next block technically has the lower hash out of the two. It's just to get everyone on the same page faster.
Yeah. Okay. Moving from Milagro to BLSt. This was another one that I picked out of the GitHub. We covered Milagro in. I'm pronouncing that wrong, aren't I? I can tell by your face. Milagro.
I always assumed it was Milagro, but I've never actually heard the authors pronounce it, so I'm hesitant to say.
Well, my mother's middle name is Milagro, and it's spelt like that, and it's pronounced Milagro. But, who knows? So
yeah, but that has the word lag in it. Like, I just feel like that's poor branding of a cryptography library to say it's laggy.
Yeah, it's also got grow in it, so it's lags and it grows. So from Milagro to BLSt, we covered Milagro. I'm going to go Milagro. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that we covered Milagro around, I'm going to say 18 months ago. All right, I'm going to go that far.
I'm sure we've talked about it since then, but yeah, it was. Well, no, it couldn't have been 18 months ago. I think we've only used it for a year now. Like, I think it's like 1 year and 1 month old. Like, I think when I actually did this change, it was 1 year old, roughly.
Okay.
Like a week off.
So yeah, about a year ago. So we're moving from Milagro to BLSt, which actually I'm going to ask you another question along these lines. But what does this mean, and why have you decided to make the move from Milagro to BLSt? What exactly is BLSt as well, by the way?
So both of these are libraries for dealing with BLS signatures. So BLS signatures are something used in Meros because instead of a standard like Bitcoin signature where you sign a message and you just have signature, BLS signatures do the same thing. Don't get me wrong, but they have a very unique property. It's not like just unique to BLS; it's unique to what's called a pairing curve, which BLS is a family of. But you can combine two signatures. If you saw one signature here and one signature somewhere else, you can just add them together and it's just still a valid signature. Of course, you can't validate on them. There's still limitations here. I'm not trying to say otherwise. But that means that if we have 100 votes per transaction and we have 10 transactions a second, at the end of each block, we can produce a single signature for every single one of those votes, a single 96-byte signature, which is completely verifiable for every single part of it. Which is something I am actually very excited about personally. So it's really just a space-saving mechanism that really lets us properly save votes, which is important not only for efficiency, but for security. So when we're using BLS, though, it does have trade-offs. There's a reason not everyone uses it, and the primary trade-off is just speed issues. It is a decent bit slower than what you would use for Bitcoin or ED25519, which is a newer signature scheme that's more efficient than what Bitcoin uses by default.
I feel
so with
Sorry, I feel like we spoke about this last month. Didn't we say something along the lines of, this might not have been in a podcast, this might have just been a conversation that we had, but didn't we say something along the lines of BLS hadn't really been made maximally efficient as of yet?
So, right, so there's a few things here. So, Milagro was actually the single part of our code base using the most time.
Okay.
When I have this test, this is one I'm very proud of, and it's called the consensus revert test. And it basically simulates just tens of transactions per second. Locally, it's not like doing networking or a network. I'm not trying to say, oh, Meros can handle tens of transactions, that's its limit, or that's its minimum. I'm just saying we have this test that just simulates a ton of transactions, just runs them through the database and make sure they're properly indexed, saved, coordinated, that the node isn't randomly going to encounter an error when doing what's expected behavior at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then the revert part of it is then it says, oh, wait, no, we're reorganizing to a different chain. Scrap all this, go back, and verify that it reverts to the exact same state, which is its own very complicated problem we're dealing with Meros. So it's just this very large test that's very expansive, and it effectively simulates just a ton of work at scale, just basically every part of the node other than networking. Just all the processing logic, all the block handling, all the transaction handling, voting handling. Anyways, so when I'm running that test, BLS was actually the plurality. It was like the part of our code base that was using the more time than anything else, yet it wasn't over 50%, of course. So it's just Milagro isn't known for being the speediest library. Like, there's a reason we use Milagro, and there's a reason we use BLS signatures, and I'm still happy with that decision. I'm not trying to say BLS is so slow it can't be used. No, and there's definitely further optimizations we can do as a project as Meros. But beyond that, BLSt is another BLS library, but it's much faster just for, creating signatures, verifying them, and doing similar operations. So just by moving to BLSt, we've already made our code more efficient. And then, again, there's other things we can do as a project to efficiently handle aggregation and speed it up there. But beyond that, BLS is a draft. I don't want to say a draft like it's unsafe or it's not peer reviewed. No, it's actively being peer reviewed. It's just actively being further developed for better performance and improves. I think we're at the point where security is, it's secure. Like, sure, there's micro things you can do that technically make it secure, but when we're talking about real world practice, it's as secure as it's going to get, and definitely as secure as it needs to be. So when we deal with BLS, there's signature generation, like when you actually go to sign something, how you sign it. And there's a couple others, but that's the main one we're concerned about, just actually signing messages. And this is done via a process known as hash-to-curve. And there is a large paper about this hash-to-curve algorithm, and BLSt implements it natively. There's just a function within BLSt to call hash-to-curve, and it's very useful, and they have an optimized implementation. That said, Milagro does not have such an implementation. When we deal with Milagro, we actually used its own hash-to-curve, which just is not meeting the specification and is therefore not the best for interacting with other libraries, unfortunately. So with BLSt, not only did we just get native access to that, but we also got speed. The only other part I want to note is we actually do still use Milagro in our code base. So we have the Python tests, which are basically a complete re-implementation of the Meros protocol to ensure accuracy, ensure protocol compliance, and really just test technical accuracy in every aspect. And that still uses Milagro, actually, because right, sorry, I was just thinking about my train of thought. One of the things I like to do is I like to make sure it has its own implementation of each algorithm, just because if we use BLSt in two different places, and for some reason BLSt, which is actually a massive library being used in a few places, I'm not trying to say I don't trust BLSt. I'm just saying if we use BLSt in both places, and for some reason it does happen to have an issue, BLSt's issue becomes Meros' issue. So with Python, I like to have multiple implementations of every algorithm just to ensure compatibility. And with that, Python actually still uses Milagro because of that. And as part of it using Milagro, Python now implements the hash-to-curve paper itself, so it's actually compatible. So yeah, we actually still use both, but BLSt is just faster and it focuses on compliance with the specification, while Milagro still has all the operations needed, but it used a different algorithm in one place that made it produce different signatures. So it's just about speed and compliance with the specifications. And then I took the opportunity to use both so we can just diversify and make sure that no matter what, even if one has an issue, we can verify that by testing against the other.
Is Milagro still being actively worked on or not?
So Milagro actually has a few different implementations. One is in C, which is the one we use, and then one is in Rust. And the Rust one actually is compliant with the specification. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say Milagro as a project is bad, but the C version of Milagro did not implement that part of the specification. Um, so yes, it's under active development, but the C one, which is the one we're using, because they wrote implementations in a few different languages, uh, I would assume it's being actively developed. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not being developed at a rate fast enough where they're staying competitive with speed. And even if they were competitive with speed, they just aren't compliant with everyone else at this point in time. So
Okay, so Rust uh, does kind of nicely lead me on to my next question. I had said I was going to ask you this in a few months' time, and that was probably a year ago. But we spoke about the language that Meros or a Meros node is implemented in, which is NIM. And
mhm.
I said before, or I guess we'd come to the agreement that it's a somewhat exotic language.
Yep.
And are you still happy with that decision, or are you now considering that you may move Meros away from Nim and possibly towards something like Rust?
So there's a lot of considerations to make here, and I've talked about this before, but here's what I'm going to say. I love NIM as a language. It's the best language I've ever used. I love the functionality. I love what's included with it. And it has something called metaprogramming, which means when you actually go to compile Meros, or compile, just compile any NIM code, you can have it edit itself at compile time and just really do a lot of interesting things. And almost every modern language has this. I'm not trying to say, oh, this is exclusive to NIM. But NIM has the best metaprogramming I've ever seen in a language, just in terms of power and accessibility. And it's something I honestly really like. That said, NIM as a project is not something I'm happy with. The compiler has issues with bugs. When they release a new version of the compiler, sometimes they make tweaks. So older versions no longer behave exactly the same. Like it's these random edge cases, and they are arguably bugs. So because they're bugs, they are changed. They're not changing like core parts of the library that will affect everyone. But I'm just personally not a fan of how the project is being managed when it comes to their versioning system. And then the compiler itself just has a decent amount of bugs. And it generates correct code. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, for all I know, it's going to generate an invalid private key and oh no, we'll lose all our funds. No, it generates proper code. It's just sometimes it won't compile what it should consider valid code.
Okay.
Um, so while I love the language, I'm really not happy with the compiler. So I would not start any future project in NIM at this point in time due to NIM's compiler, even though I love the language. That said, I am still happy to have written Meros in NIM because I legitimately believe if I wrote Meros in anything else, Meros would not exist today. The reason I picked NIM was just because of how accessible, expressive, clean, powerful it was. There's a lot of reasons which I picked it, and I still maintain it's the best language I've ever used. It's just the compiler is the compiler. And when you look at it in its yes, I would not recommend NIM because it's not just about, oh, this language is pretty. It's also about the ecosystem. It's about actually using it. And when you actually go to use it, the compiler comes into play.
Yeah.
But it's because NIM was so friendly, expressive, that I stuck with Meros. I know C++. It's the first language I know. I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm some script kiddie who needs a language to hold my hand. No, C++ can be annoying. It can be stressful, it can be verbose, it can be argumentative, so on and so on. And that can de-incentivize you from working on a project. It can demoralize you. It can make you frustrated to work on something. And because NIM was so expressive, I always enjoyed working on Meros. And I really think that helped me stick to it. I mean, 2 years later, and we're still here and we're still going. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm happy we use NIM. I love it as a language. I would not use it in the future or recommend it, just due to the compiler.
And chances are Meros stays with Nim for the time being. There's no chances to move across to something like Rust.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in using Rust. I would want to use Rust a lot more. We implemented a new atomic swap protocol, and our implementation was named ASMR. We talked about it here. It's atomic swaps for Meros, and it actually supports a few currencies: Meros, Nano, Monero, so on. But that implementation is in Rust, and I would definitely love to increase the amount of Rust in our code base. That said, for us to use Rust in the Meros node, well, you can use Rust in them at the same time. Like, technically, I would really want to just write a node in Rust, and we don't have the resources to write a new node entirely right now. So, yeah, for now, we're staying in them.
ASMR, I was going to ask you a question about that, so you led us into it perfectly. I was in the Pivex Discord. I always have to name drop Pivex. I was in the Pivex Discord, and somebody was talking about privacy coins, and they spoke about Monero, and the person's words were, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said that the Meros development team are on fire because they're going to have atomic swap soon. To which I obviously replied,
You
"Yeah,
mean the Monero or?
yeah, the Monero team are on fire
Yeah, you
because
said
they're."
Meros. That's why I was checking.
Oh, did I say Meros? Sorry. Yeah, the
And
Monero
I
team.
think I am on fire. I mean, a bit egocentric there, but I think I've done good work.
Yeah,
But
you've been
it sounds
okay.
like the discussion was about Monero.
Right,
So.
exactly. Because we're talking about privacy coins, and someone said the Monero team are on fire because they're going to have atomic swap soon. So I said, "Oh well, a mate of mine he's the mastermind behind that." No, I didn't say mastermind, but I did say he's a part of that group. So
Right.
the story is, and this is where the news is. I guess congratulations are in order because you and that band of merry men and possibly merry women have actually been funded to work on an atomic swap implementation for Monero. Now,
Mhm.
um, the although I'm happy for you on that front, I was also a little bit worried because I'm hoping that they don't take the Mero Starman away to go and play for Monero. So, how much additional work do you think it will be? And do you think that the Meros timeline itself will be affected by your having to work on another project?
So, um, sorry, just gathering my thoughts. I want to start just by clarifying a couple of things. So, I did not develop the protocol at all. The atomic swap protocol was completely done by some very smart people out there, and I was not at all behind it. I was just the first person to write an implementation, and I wrote that implementation again, as I said before, for Meros, Nano, Monero. It can actually be expanded to a few coins. We wrote it like this, very abstracted internally, because we want to work with these other groups. We didn't develop this protocol yet. It's advantageous for us, and not only do we want to take advantage of that, but we want to say thanks. We want to work together with Monero in the future, and that's why we added Monero support to our tool.
Yep.
So when we built the tool, I reached out to the authors of the protocol itself, and we got on a call and we kind of just discussed it. They were excited to, like they said, they took a break and went on vacation after they released it. And when they came back, we just had our tool there. So, and we said how much we appreciated their protocol and how we really thought it was very clever. And yeah, and they offered to me and the person I worked on it with. I worked on it with Plasma Power,
Yeah.
a former Nano developer. He still is in the Nano community. Don't get me wrong, and he still works on some Nano stuff in his spare time, just around the ecosystem. But he actually used to work as a official Nano node developer.
Okay.
He is not at all on the Meros team. We just worked together on this project because it was something we both wanted to do, and we're just friends already.
Yeah.
So they asked if we would be interested. They said they wanted to do their own implementation. And if they did one, they were going to create a funding proposal for it with the Monero CCS,
Yeah.
which is a crowdfunding system where anyone can donate to causes they believe in.
Yeah.
And I personally said, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in helping out. And I only said I would do a few hours a week. I think the exact number were 5 to 10. Seriously, something I could do on Saturday I have open, nothing that would affect Meros itself.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, we'd definitely be excited for you to do that, you know. So yeah, I did join up with them to work on their new implementation, which went through Monero and is primarily aimed at Monero, but it is also meant to be a modular suite that can basically be integrated by anything. It could be used by a wallet, by a DEX, by a website, whatever. You know, like I'm not saying you can run this in JavaScript like you could with an Ethereum dApp and MetaMask. I'm just saying, you know, it's meant to be extremely easy to integrate into your backend, into your code base, into your whatever. And it is meant to be modular, despite it being focused at Monero. It's meant to be internally in such a way where we could add other cryptocurrencies such as Meros. I'm not at all saying the group of people I'm in is going to do that or prioritize that or even design with that in mind. I'm just saying I do personally plan to add Meros as well to it.
How
Um,
how long is the project for? I've got a link. I will put a link to the actual
right.
proposal in the description. But how long is the project for, and how much funding did they actually raise to add
So
atomic swaps?
right. So they created a funding proposal a few weeks ago. It actually started a lot of discussions in the community due to the amount of funds that were asked for. It's roughly 280,000 for about 6 months of work
Yeah.
by the team,
Do,
and it started a lot of
do
discussions due to the size, the
yeah.
6 months length.
Do you think that do you think that that's quite a lot for adding
I
atomic
definitely
swaps?
think it's a lot, but considering that it's a team of 5 or 6 people, not even including me, who are going to be working full time on it, and considering the scope, how they're talking about formal specifications of actual implementations, just a lot of designing forethought to make sure they do it clean, then an actual implementation, and then review. And I definitely think it's worth it. And the community agreed. It was funded rather quickly, surprisingly, given the
Yes.
size. A single user donated actually 250,000
Yes. Yeah.
USD.
Yeah.
It was really astonishing to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, they just said they obviously believed in it enough to put down that much money. So the community wants this because they believe it will enhance the ecosystem. Atomic swaps are a completely decentralized way for multiple cryptocurrencies to trade. It's the foundation of decentralized exchanges and extremely important, as we discussed, interoperability with other projects, which is something I'm really excited for because even though I'm the lead of Meros, and even though I believe it's an amazing option for payments, I still want to work with these other projects because every project is going to have its strengths. And I don't think tribalism is ever going to be the answer to cryptocurrency. I think it's about complementing each other
Yeah.
and adding original thoughts to the space.
Yeah.
So I completely lost my
Well,
train of thought.
interestingly enough, I'm just going to add
Oh, yeah.
an interestingly enough, I was on a podcast with a guy called Doug, who's a community member. I think his name's Doug
Mm-hmm.
or Darren or Derek, something beginning with a D. And it was a thing.
Do you know his username?
Um, Monero Talk, I think he calls himself. He has a podcast called Monero Talk or Monero Radio or something like that.
Oh yeah, Monero Talk. It's a Monero podcast. I was actually talking a bit because we were interested in doing a podcast together just because of atomic swaps. Unfortunately, it didn't work out due to timing on their end. Their podcast host is actually running a political campaign,
Yes, that
which is
guy.
not something I want to comment on. I'm just commenting that that's why they're very busy.
Yeah.
And yes, I believe his name is Doug Truman. I want to say it's something like that. Let me
Something
actually.
like that. But anyway, well, so we were discussing is that your end or mine? I think that's yours. Right. We were discussing working together in cryptocurrency, and I was saying that like the tribalism or those days are kind of behind us. And interestingly enough, he disagreed. But we the conversation was cut before I got the chance to yell at him. Well, is somebody from somewhere else working on your atomic swaps? Blah blah blah. But anyway, let's move on from Monero and atomic swaps.
Just as a quick note, though, Douglas Tuman, that's his name.
Yes, that guy. So just let's move on. And there's something else that I want to ask you about. And I know you really hate when I pander to the mob of cryptocurrency, but right now NFTs are big news. And
Oh,
and Meros can handle data. So therefore, I'm thinking Meros can handle data, NFTs are data. Can Meros handle NFTs? If so, is there a chance that you may at some point in the future consider putting NFTs on Meros, or could other people if they so chose to?
Yes, no, sort of. So yes, Meros can run NFTs. The data transactions allow you to store data, and you can define a way to say, "Hey, I'm creating an NFT. This is a NFT for this piece of art," and then you can create a data that says, "Oh, I'm going to transfer ownership." And Meros data transactions don't actually say, "Hey, here's an NFT we're transferring ownership of." No, it's just random data. It's just that in that data, you can define a way to define NFTs and transfer them. You can build a specification on top of Meros which utilizes data transactions. So, as part of this, sorry, I just running through my head. Sorry. Um, right. So, as part of this, yes, you can do NFTs, and you brought this up before, so I have considered it. I am personally not at all interested in adding them to Meros. Well, Meros does have instant transactions and they're feeless, and we support NFTs technically. I don't want to be known as the NFT platform. Our priority has always been on being the best currency out there. And while NFT is definitely useful, I'm not interested personally in turning Meros into a marketplace sort of coin. So data transactions exist for a reason, and if someone wants to build it, it can. And if it gains adoptance, and therefore it brings adoptance to Meros as a whole, that's something I would be excited for. I'm not trying to say, oh no, I regret data transactions. Obviously, they're for a reason. I just don't personally want to be the one championing this cause. But someone else definitely can. You just have to build a wallet that tracks for these types of data transactions. Internally says, oh, here's an NFT, here's the current owner, oh, here's an update to its status, and yeah, anyone can write a protocol for that, and anyone can write their own wallet or modify the existing Meros node to handle that.
Yeah,
it's just not something I'm personally interested in.
Captain Integrity over here, as always. Whereas I
I
would
just
jump
don't
from one
feel
trend to
turning
another.
Meros into a full NFT marketplace is advantageous to it as a currency. And yes, I added data transactions because I think that would be useful, and I'm sure that you'll at some point deploy an NFT on Meros just to prove a point. And even if data transactions get usage, it's not going to affect Meros as a currency. We have a spam filter, where every time you create a transaction, you have to attach a little bit of work to it. You have to solve a few math problems to say, hey, this isn't spam. I spent time proving it isn't spam. Please handle my transaction. So, as part of the spam filter, we actually have two. We have one for send transactions, which are just how you send money around, send Meros. And then we have one for datas. So if datas are actually overwhelming the network to the point where we're unable just to process actual Meros sends, we can actually raise the data difficulty to lower the amount of data generated, because each data would need more work behind it. And because we would be lowering the data difficulty, we would then be able to handle more sends and keep Meros as primarily a currency. Okay. So it definitely exists, and it's definitely not something I'm worried about. I just don't want to personally champion the cause.
Yeah. And I think I personally I respect you for taking that position, because
thank you.
It does mean that the rebels amongst us who do like to jump from one trend to another, we can just go ahead and do it if we feel like doing it, and then when the next big thing comes along, we'll see if we can squeeze that into Meros somehow. But thank you for that. I asked the community quite a few I asked the community to give us some questions in Discord. The link to the Discord is below, or in the description if you're just listening to the audio version of this. And we got quite a good response. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the time, we're already over time, so we're not going to get them all in. I'm going to pick two of them, and then we'll have to do the other three next week. So there was five in total. So I'm going to pick two now. And some of them are kind of like multi questions as well. So we may be here a while. But the first question I wanted to ask, or I wanted to share, was from a user called Sopo, TSOPO. So I'm going to say Sopo. And the question is, how much value is being placed on atomic swaps? As in, if you were to market the project, if you were to be a marketer, I understand that you have some marketing friends. Where would you rank atomic swaps in order of importance? Would you say something like what he's put there is Meros is just nano with mining and atomic swap functionality?
Right, so I definitely wouldn't say that. I think Meros has a lot of functionality outside of that, from a different spam mechanism to support for data transactions to increased
And
security to
NFTs.
distribution to incentivizing people to verify the network. I think Meros has a lot to offer the
And
space.
NFTs
Uh,
as well. You forgot NFTs.
I said data transactions. And then one of the things talked about with Nano very often is vote stapling. It actually had a proposal written up by Plasma Power, which unfortunately has been put off to the side due to limited development ability. Like just, they have to prioritize where their developers go. And vote stapling is basically just when a vote happens, they save the votes. So next time a transaction validity is asked about, they just broadcast the existing votes. Right now, they actually do a new vote, and it's simple as just signing a new signature. It's not anything too difficult, but they still have to do it. So because of that's why we use BLSt, just so we can save the votes to the disk, and it's completely verifiable, and the blockchain helps us coordinate that. So we definitely offer a lot. I personally think atomic swaps are very important, and if we actually use them, it's definitely something we can market by saying, yo, we have this DEX market. I'm not saying a DEX on Meros, I'm not at all saying that. I'm just saying if we got listed on a DEX thanks to atomic swaps, we can say, yeah, we're very happy to have this decentralized opportunity to get into Meros, because I personally love decentralization. But it's not something I would market on its own, because it's something every cryptocurrency out there supports now, basically. I mean, Meros supports it, but also Nano does. I can't say it's Nano plus atomic swaps, because I wrote ASMR, which Plasma added Nano support into.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, Meros, I do think Meros has a lot of improvements over Nano, but it's for separate areas. And while I love to talk about atomic swaps because I think they're amazing, it's not something unique to Meros.
Yeah. Um, was the main reason why you worked on ASMR as you did and built this, I guess, custom solution? Was it because you rate atomic swaps as being so important? Because I guess if you didn't think it was that important, you could have waited until after mainnet to decide to add atomic swaps.
Well, there was definitely a few reasons I wanted to do it. I was very excited by the protocol, and it was definitely something I could edit. Meros would benefit from. But I also spent a few weeks actually building it, and that was a few weeks I wasn't working on Meros itself. But I have always considered atomic swaps critical for Meros to launch. It's very important to have that interoperability accessible to enable a lot of ways to expand.
Yeah.
And because of that, I was actually planning on shipping a special transaction type. It would not be the standard transaction. Like with Bitcoin, Bitcoin has a scripting engine where you can write scripts. You can write little bits of code. It's nowhere near Ethereum, of course, but you can write little bits of code that say the rules for a transaction to be spent. And that's what enables atomic swaps, something called hash time locked contracts, which are just Bitcoin saying, hey, we're doing an atomic swap. Anyone who provides this password within this time, it's a whole thing. But whole thing aside, as I was planning on adding a special type of transaction to Meros, which had its own scripting system. Scripts are very inefficient when you use them for every transaction, because you're using them for every transaction when most transactions just specifying a public key. So it was going to be a special type of transaction to not have that inefficiency, but it was going to enable atomic swaps along with a few other things. So thanks to working on this implementation, even though it took a few weeks away from Meros, it means we didn't have to develop this complicated scripting system, which would have taken even longer, just to have atomic swaps at mainnet.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something I consider important, but ASMR actually allowed us to save time by enabling us to not add such a complicated feature into the protocol at launch.
Yeah, yeah. I remember we did discuss that when we first came across ASMR. You did say it actually had
Yep.
saved you quite a lot of time. Okay, on to the next question. The next question, it was when will you get a better webcam light? This was by a different user. When will you get a better? Obviously, you've sorted that out this week. You're in
Thank
your
you.
looks like you're in Hollywood or somewhere like that. It's absolutely amazing, the ambience. Any ideas for marketing? And is that an after launch problem? So, are you considering how you're going to be marketing Meros already? And like, what sorts of things have you thought about?
So we have a user on our Discord, Strontium, who's become our communications lead.
Yeah.
I say those quotes not to say it's a joke title or anything. It's just on the one hand, yeah, that's literally what his role on Discord is. On the other hand, we don't really have a team. I mean, anyone can step up and say, "Hey, I'm doing communications." It's just me personally saying I consider him the lead on that.
Yeah.
Meros doesn't have an official team. Like, obviously, I'm not going to lie and say the project isn't centered around me as the developer behind Meros for all this time. I'm just saying, anyone could step in, anyone could fork Meros, anyone could start contributing code, anyone could technically do anything.
Yep.
So Strontium's been handling our communications, which is beyond just marketing, but he's actually been coming up with a lot of interesting ideas. We've been developing some graphics to kind of get Meros out there, and there's actually a lot that I'm very excited for coming out over the next few weeks. We've also been working on a brand guide, which will just let us clearly present how we believe Meros should be presented for a consistent view across everyone who builds something related to us.
Yeah. Awesome.
So it's
do you think
it's definitely something we're trying to boost the priority of and work on over the next few weeks, leading up to launch and definitely after launch as well.
you think we could get Strontium on one of these podcasts sooner rather
I
than
would
later?
absolutely love to do that,
Yeah.
though his schedule may be a bit weird because he's in Japan yet works the night shift. I think it's
Ah.
it's a thing.
So yeah, that might cancel each other out because I know they're ahead of us. It's always a nightmare
Yep.
trying to orchestrate between Asia and America, being in Europe
Mm-hmm.
as I am. So yeah, we'll we'll get back to you on that one, I guess. Going forward, how do you plan on funding yourself and your efforts?
So with Meros, Monero has the CCS, their crowdfunding system, which we talked about earlier, and anyone can donate. And it's a system I greatly admired and definitely something I considered adding to Meros. Yet with Meros, we ended up going with something we called the Meros Development Fund, which we've talked about before. And it's an on-chain way of anyone with Meros, any Meros at all, to say, hey, every 6 months they can say, hey, I really like this developer. I think he should get rewarded for his efforts. I think he should be encouraged to work on the project. So that means every 6 months. Wait, it's either 3 months or 6 months. I actually don't remember. I wrote the protocol here. It was the very first Meros improvement proposal, but I actually don't remember if it's 3 or 6 months off the top of my head.
I'm gonna say it's 6.
I think it is 6, but it technically could be 3. Anyways, but the point is, however many months it is, anyone can submit a proposal. They can say, hey, I've done this for Meros in the past. I'm interested in doing this more. I wrote this code. I'm building this light wallet. I did these graphics. I'm building this site to raise awareness. Really anything. It's not just limited to development tasks. Anyone can step up and say, hey, I've contributed this far. I feel like I've shown I'm not going to just walk away after this. And I would love to continue. But, funding is a thing. We live in a society. Insert joke statements here. And that means that people have to pay rent, buy food, and it's not something I'm not acknowledging the importance of.
Yep.
And because of that, every however many months, anyone can submit a proposal saying, hey, I'd like some funding, and our users can vote on who they want to receive funding. And then Meros will give them, every week, I think it is, they give them a fraction of what the total amount is. So I believe, okay, so 5% of the previous block reward
Yeah.
for the past few months is what's given out.
Okay.
And because that 5% is out of 100%, it's actually 5% out of 105%. Anyways, it ends up like 4.7% of the total supply. So 4.7% of the total supply goes to this. And every week over the next few months, they get the corresponding fraction of that.
Yeah.
Based on how many people voted for them and, just the fact that it's every week. They're not getting 4.7% of the supply every week. They're getting, if it's over 6 months, they're getting 1/24 of that.
Yeah, and that's not all into one particular thing. It could be multiple proposals that share that amount.
Yeah, it's multiple proposals that share that amount.
Okay. All right.
So it's not meant for rapid action. It basically is a DAO, don't get me wrong, but it's not one that does every month. We really wanted to minimize politics. It's not something I'm expecting to get hundreds of people to sign up for. I personally would expect one or two independent developers to get it, and then a few organizations as well. People who will, on a month-to-month basis, look at the projects out there and distribute funds on a quicker scale. Like looking at a multi-sig or something. But I do think it's the best way to minimize politics and just keep things going.
Yeah, and get engagement from people who
Yes,
are stakeholders. Okay.
exactly.
The last two questions are sorry. First of all, let me apologize to the people who did put in questions and haven't had them answered on this particular podcast. But we're well over time now. Kayaba loves it when we go well over half an hour.
We said we were moving to 45 minutes already, so.
I think you said it.
No, I love your longer podcasts. I think there are better podcasts.
Yeah, I think you said it.
Mind is an abstract concept invented by humanity to explain how they feel as they move forward in their lives.
No.
Yes.
No. So apologies to the people who I didn't get to answer questions, but I have made a note of them and I will endeavor to answer them next month. I'm going to ask the same two questions I always love to sign off with. Kayaba's already smiling. First question is, when is the next testnet coming, which will hopefully be the last developers testnet? How long do we have to wait, sir?
So, I'm actually been considering if the next testnet is going to be a developer's testnet or just the testnet. Now, I've said before, I kind of want to do a singular testnet that's just going to last a month leading up to Meros, really thoroughly tested in every aspect. That's going to handle every 2 weeks. Meros nodes, as part of our RandomX, the CPU-only mining algorithm we use, every 2 weeks you're supposed to update a variable in play. I think it's 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks or 2 days. I don't actually remember off the top of my head. I'm forgetting quite a few timestamps here. I promise the code's accurate. I have extensive documentation. We have some Python code. It verifies it independently. I worked hard on this stuff.
Yeah.
The point is, because of that, that's one of the things that just takes time to test, and one of the reasons I want to do a larger testnet. And beyond that, the first Meros development fund, voting opens as soon as the network launches, and it actually triggers 1 month in. So it's actually it's accelerated to, it's not waiting 6 months, it's accelerated to ensure that funding gets going at the start of the network. Technically it's a month in, but we do have to give users some time to vote unless we wanted to centralize it, which would just be a pre-mine, which definitely not doing.
Yeah.
That was on the table at one point, but I'm just really not a fan of centralized solutions like that.
Did someone talk you out of it and someone talk you into actually doing a DAO? That sounds
exactly. We had a whole issue about how to handle funding, and this was the proposal to resolve it.
Yeah, sounds like a very smart suggestion by that very smart person. Yeah.
So, I lost my train of thought again. Where were we? Oh yeah, so the testnet. So that's one of the reasons I want to do a larger testnet, is because the 1 month one will actually trigger that first round of voting and actually test that. Because of course the Python will as well, but it's always good to get some humans in there.
Yeah.
So I am considering doing one more developer testnet in preparation, but on the other hand, they take time to run. So I'm still taking it over because it may take up so much time that I don't feel it's going to be worth the gains from it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
But I'm definitely hoping to get the public testnet up by the end of November.
Awesome. Okay, great. So Kayaba, thank you so much for devoting your time and giving us this transparency, as you always do, as you have been doing for the past 2 years now. Is it over 2 years? I think so.
I think so. I think Meros is like 2 years, 5 months now.
So thank you for that. Congratulations to those who have watched up to this point and to those who have listened up to this point. You've made it to the end. Well done. Give yourself a pat on the back. Thank you very much. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and all that other good stuff. Me and Kayaba will be back next month, possibly with Strontium, you say his name was? Yeah,
Yep.
possibly with Strontium to discuss some of the marketing that may take place and how close we are to the next testnet. We may even be in the next testnet by the time you see the next December update. So,
Mhm.
thanks very much for listening, Kayaba. Again, thank you very much. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I let you go back to the dungeon to do more coding?
Just as always, thanks for having me on. I always love doing these, and it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for coming on, and yeah, and that's a wrap. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next month.